are now okay now. Okay, they were that made me feel uncomfortable. Another is on for a while.
Hi, my name's James, welcome back to Malt and Make, and today we're going to make some beer. The first thing you have to do is collect your water, and I normally do this the night before because trying to get it through a filter system and heat it up takes quite a long time. One of the other main components of beer is malted barley, and I like to mill it the night before. You can see me putting my grain mill on top of the Mashtun and pretending to plug it in. There isn't actually a socket there. What we're trying to do is to make a porridge, and cracking open the grains makes it a more efficient process of extracting the sugars, flavour and colour from the grain. Once that porridge has been left to sit for a while, about an hour, to let the enzymes convert the starches in the malt into sugars, you then drain off the liquid and boil it, adding hops or other flavourings. Chill it down and put it in a fermenter with some yeast and leave it to turn into beer, which takes about 2 weeks. So in total it's about a day's work to brew the beer and a couple of weeks before it's ready. Part of the filtering process takes the minerals out of the water. Now, I'm doing that on purpose because I've got really hard water where I brew, but it does mean I have to add some back in. While you're only using small quantities, it's really important because these minerals determine a lot of the flavour of the beer. And you can see me adding them just on top of that grain that I've milled. This is my brewery control panel, and I've got an all-electric brewery, so the heating elements and the pumps are all controlled here. While the water's heating up, I tend to recirculate it round and round in that hot liquor tank, so that the controller's got a more accurate temperature to work to. All I need to do is set the temperature I want, and then wait, and it'll take care of everything else. Now, what you're aiming for is something between 55 and 70 degrees Celsius, or 150 and 155 Fahrenheit, for the mash that you create, that's the mixture of water and grain. This is exactly the right temperature to get the enzymes that naturally occur in the malted barley to break down the starches into sugars, which is what the yeast will turn into alcohol. Now the water's up to temperature, it's time to transfer some of it across. I use a program called Beersmith to calculate just how hot the water needs to be and how much I need to move across. You can see the water's coming up underneath the grain, which is why it's almost floating on top. And because I have my kettles all on scales, I can figure out exactly how much water I've added. Now, if you do this slowly enough, it'll mix perfectly with the grain, but if you do it a bit quicker, you can always just use a mash paddle to get it to mix about. As you can see, I hit 66.4 degrees bang on. I don't know if that's what I was aiming for, but it's a good number anyway. During the mash, I take the liquid out of the bottom of the mash tun, through a pump, which pushes it through a coil in my hot liquor tank. This does a couple of things. The grain bed acts as a filter, but I can also change the temperature of the mash tun by changing the water temperature in the hot liquor tank. While I've got some time to spare, I'm going to sanitize the fermenter, that's the thing on the right with the black neoprene jacket. It's a big stainless steel tank, and it's what the beer is made in by the yeast. After about an hour, the mash is done, and it's time to zero out the scales. I'm going to be adding water on top of the mash, while simultaneously taking liquid from the bottom. This is a process called sparging, and this particular method is called a fly sparge. Now you can see that this hot wort, which is the sugary liquid that we've made, is going to come from the bottom, through the coil that's in the hot liquor tank, and into the final kettle, which is the boil kettle, where the hops are going to be added. This kettle has an exhaust above it, and a filter inside to try and keep the hop matter in the boil kettle. Keeping an eye on the scales gives me an idea of what's happening during the sparge. I aim to keep the volume of the mash tun about the same, so you're adding as much water as you're taking off liquid from the bottom. The other thing I'm looking for is that we're getting the right volume inside the boil kettle, and again, the brewing software will tell you just how much you're aiming to collect. If we have a look in the bottom of the boil kettle, you can start to see that hot wort coming in. That's the sugary liquid that we've created in the mash. Once we get to the end of the sparge, it's time to turn on the electric heating element and get rid of the grain that's in the mash tun. A lot of brewing is cleaning. Checking the scale on the boil kettle shows we've collected 46-ish kilos as we get towards the end. The extractor fan's going, getting rid of the moisture that we're boiling off, and we're just going to wait for that boil kettle to hit 100 degrees before we start our boil timer. We're going to be boiling for about an hour. During that process, we're going to be adding hops at different times. Here you can see me adding the first amount. This one, 1 hour from the end, is to give some bitterness to it. The thing to watch out for is boilovers. As the foam that's created on top gets higher and higher, it's sometimes important to cut the power and just let it die down for a few seconds. But don't worry, this tends to only last for the first 15 minutes of the boil or so. 10 minutes to go, and it's time to add some more hops. These ones are going to add flavour and aroma to the beer. In a minute, we're going to start chilling it down. So I'm going to connect all of the hoses up to my plate chiller. This uses water to chill down the beer and gives me the added advantage of having some hot liquid at the end that I can use to clean. Last hop addition, this one's going into a filter because these are whole cone hops. Cut the power and start to chill. Like I said, a lot of brewing is cleaning, so it's useful to have some hot water on hand after the brewing process is done to clean up. The hottest water goes into the hot liquor tank to be used for cleaning, and then after that, it has to just go down the drain, unfortunately. Once everything's cooled down to around 20 degrees, that's 20 Celsius, it goes into the fermenter. You can see I'm filling it from the bottom as I open the valve here. Of course, it's yeast that makes beer, so I'm going to rehydrate this yeast in some water at about 25 degrees according to the packet, while I fill up the fermenter. Once I have done, it needs to be oxygenated. Then it's just a case of adding the yeast and keeping it at just the right temperature for it to work. And in a couple of weeks, you'll have beer. Well, I've got to do some cleaning up. I'll see you next time.